The physical act of going to Blockbuster, browsing the shelves, and negotiating selections with family or friends had created connections and memories that streaming, for all its convenience, could not replicate. What we lost wasn't just a place to rent movies, explains cultural historian David Marcus. We lost a form of community engagement. In small towns especially, the local Blockbuster was often a gathering place, somewhere you'd run into neighbors, strike up conversations with strangers about films you both enjoyed, maybe even meet someone you'd end up dating. That social dimension is largely absent from the streaming experience. This sense of loss is particularly acute for those who grew up during Blockbuster's heyday in the 1990s. For this generation, now in their 30s and 40s, Blockbuster represents not just a retail chain, but a tangible link to their youth, a shared cultural touchstone that has vanished almost completely from the landscape. My kids will never understand what it was like to go to Blockbuster on a Friday night, says Jennifer Torres, 42. That combination of excitement and pressure, knowing you had to choose carefully because you only got one or two movies for the weekend. The disappointment when all the copies of the new release you wanted were already gone. The discovery of some weird indie film you'd never heard of but ended up loving. It was an experience that shaped how my generation relates to movies in a fundamental way. This nostalgia has transformed Blockbuster from a failed business into a cultural symbol, a representation of an analog era that seems increasingly distant in our digital age. The blue and yellow logo has become a shorthand for 1990s nostalgia, appearing on t-shirts, social media memes, and even as a Halloween costume. The brand has achieved a strange kind of immortality in death that it never possessed in life. Nowhere is this transformation more evident than in Bend, Oregon, where the world's last Blockbuster store continues to operate as an independent franchise. Opened in 2000, this location has outlived its corporate parent by almost a decade, becoming both a functioning video rental store and a kind of living museum. The Bend Blockbuster survives through a combination of local support, tourism, and merchandise sales. Visitors come from around the world to experience a retail environment that has all but disappeared elsewhere, taking selfies with the iconic sign and browsing physical media in an age of digital streaming. The store has been featured in documentaries, news reports, and even a comedy series on Netflix, an ironic turn for a brand that was largely destroyed by the streaming giant. We're like a living time capsule, says Sandy Harding, the general manager of the Bend store. People come in and immediately start telling us their Blockbuster memories, the movies they rented for first dates, the family traditions they had, the time they got hit with a huge late fee. It's more than nostalgia, it's like they're reconnecting with a part of themselves they thought was gone forever. This emotional connection to Blockbuster goes beyond simple nostalgia for a retail experience. It represents a longing for a particular moment in American cultural history, a time when entertainment choices were more limited but also more communal, when the act of selecting a film involved physical presence and human interaction rather than algorithmic recommendations. For all its success as a business at its peak, Blockbuster's most enduring legacy may be this cultural imprint, the way it shaped how a generation experienced film and television. The company's rise and fall mirrors broader trends in American consumer culture, the initial excitement of new retail concepts, the period of market dominance and cultural ubiquity, and the eventual disruption by technological change. But there remains something uniquely poignant about Blockbuster's demise. Unlike many failed retailers, it disappeared not because consumers no longer wanted its product. People still watch movies at home, more than ever, but because the method of delivery changed so fundamentally that its entire business model became obsolete almost overnight. This rapid obsolescence has led some to see Blockbuster as cursed, a company that was doomed from the start by forces beyond its control. Former employees speak of strange coincidences and eerie premonitions, as if the stores themselves somehow knew their time was limited. There was this one store in Phoenix where the lights would flicker every time a customer complained about late fees, recalls former district manager Maria Gonzalez. The technicians could never find anything wrong with the wiring. After the third service call, one of them joked that maybe the store was trying to tell us something about our business model. We all laughed, but looking back, maybe there was something to it. Such stories, mixing business history with elements of the supernatural, have become part of Blockbuster's folklore. They reflect our human tendency to seek meaning in failure, to transform mundane corporate missteps into something more profound and mysterious. Perhaps the truth is both simpler and more complex. Blockbuster failed because it could not adapt quickly enough to technological changes that transformed its industry. But those changes themselves were part of a broader shift in how we experience culture and community, a shift toward convenience and personalization at the expense of shared physical spaces and communal experiences. In that sense, the story of Blockbuster is not just about the rise and fall of a retail chain, but about a fundamental transformation in American life. It's about how we shifted from a culture where entertainment was a social activity conducted in public spaces, movie theaters, video stores, record shops, to one where it is increasingly private, personalized, and algorithmically curated. The empty storefronts that once housed Blockbuster locations stand as monuments to this transformation, physical reminders of a shared cultural experience that has largely disappeared. Some have been repurposed as restaurants, fitness centers, or other retail establishments. Others remain vacant, their distinctive facades still visible beneath new signage or behind papered-over windows. In these abandoned spaces, some claim to feel the lingering presence of what once was, the energetic buzz of weekend customers, the anticipation of new releases, the communal aspect of a shared cultural ritual. Whether these sensations are genuine hauntings or simply the product of memory and imagination is perhaps beside the point. They speak to our need to process loss, to make sense of change, to find meaning in the disappearance of institutions that once seemed permanent. What happened to Blockbuster? The straightforward answer involves technology, market disruption, and corporate decision-making. But the more complex truth encompasses changes in how we consume entertainment, how we spend our leisure time, and how we connect with our communities. It's about the trade-offs we've made in exchanging shared physical experiences for the convenience of digital consumption. And perhaps that's why the Blockbuster story continues to resonate so strongly. It's not just about a failed company, it's about a lost way of life, a set of rituals and experiences that shaped how a generation related to film and to each other. In mourning Blockbuster, we're also mourning a particular moment in our cultural history, a time when choosing a movie for the weekend was an event, an excursion, a communal activity rather than a solitary scroll through digital options. The blue and yellow signs may have largely disappeared from the American landscape, but their shadow remains in our cultural memory, in our shared nostalgia, and in the way we continue to tell the Blockbuster story as both a business cautionary tale and a bittersweet reminder of a different era in American life. The story of Blockbuster's rise and fall continues to fascinate us because it encompasses so many quintessentially American themes: innovation, expansion, domination, complacency, and ultimately, obsolescence. It's a narrative arc that has played out repeatedly in American business history, from the railroad barons to Sears, Roebuck & Co., from Woolworths to Pan Am. But Blockbuster's collapse happened with such startling speed and within such recent memory that it carries a particular poignancy and resonance. For the generation that came of age in the 1980s and 1990s, Blockbuster represented more than just a place to rent movies. It was a cultural institution that structured weekend leisure, introduced them to film beyond mainstream theatrical releases, and created shared experiences that formed the basis of relationships and memories. The loss of this institution represents not just the failure of a business model, but the passing of a particular moment in American cultural history. This is perhaps why the narrative of Blockbuster's demise has taken on almost mythic qualities. We tell and retell the story of Netflix's rejected partnership offer, of Blockbuster's delayed entry into online rental, of its failure to develop streaming, not just as business lessons, but as a kind of modern fable about hubris and the dangers of resisting change. But as with all myths, the reality was more complex and nuanced. Blockbuster was neither as blindly resistant to change as the simplified narrative suggests, nor as victimized by unavoidable technological disruption as some apologists claim. The truth lies somewhere in between, in the challenging realities of trying to transition a successful business model while maintaining profitability and satisfying shareholders. What remains undeniable is the cultural void left by Blockbuster's disappearance. The experience of browsing physical media, of discovering films through proximity on shelves rather than algorithmic recommendation, of debating selections with friends and family in real time. These aspects of film consumption have largely vanished, replaced by the convenience but comparative isolation of streaming services. In the years since Blockbuster's collapse, some independent video stores have managed to survive and even thrive by focusing on curation, community, and the physicality of the browsing experience. Stores like Scarecrow Video in Seattle, Movie Madness in Portland, and Vidiot's in Los Angeles have positioned themselves as cultural archives and community spaces rather than merely transactional retailers. Their continued existence suggests that while the mass market for physical media rental has disappeared, a niche remains for the experience that video stores once provided. Meanwhile, the Blockbuster brand itself has achieved a strange afterlife. In addition to the last store in Bend, Oregon, the name and logo have been repurposed for various nostalgic purposes. In 2020, the Bend location briefly transformed into an Airbnb, allowing guests to spend the night in a store for a 90s sleepover experience complete with snacks, video games, and of course, movies. The promotion generated worldwide media coverage and thousands of reservation requests. That same year, Blockbuster resurfaced as a promotional Twitter account, dispensing nostalgic content and witty observations about streaming culture. Though not officially associated with the original company or its current owner, Dish Network, the account attracted hundreds of thousands of followers who engaged with it as if it were the ghost of the once mighty brand, commenting on the digital world that had replaced it. These nostalgic resurgences speak to our complicated relationship with technological change. We embrace the convenience of streaming services while simultaneously mourning the lost experiences of physical media and communal selection. We recognize the inevitability of digital transformation while feeling ambivalent about what is lost in the process. This ambivalence is particularly evident in how we tell the Blockbuster story. On one hand, we mock the company's failure to adapt, turning its missed opportunities into cautionary tales for business schools and corporate strategists. On the other hand, we sentimentalize what Blockbuster represented: the Friday night excursions, the anticipation of new releases, the physicality of browsing shelves and reading back-of-box descriptions. Perhaps this duality reflects our broader cultural anxieties about technology and its impact on community. Blockbuster stores were physical spaces where people gathered, interacted, and shared experiences. Their replacement by digital platforms accessible from the isolation of individual homes mirrors a broader shift toward privatized leisure and algorithmically mediated cultural consumption. Some sociologists and cultural critics have suggested that this shift represents a fundamental change in how we experience culture and community. The loss of third places, spaces that are neither home nor work, where people can gather and interact informally, has been linked to declining social capital and increasing isolation. Video stores, along with bookstores, record shops, and other retail environments centered around cultural products, were important third places in many communities. When we lost Blockbuster, we didn't just lose a place to rent movies, argues cultural sociologist Dr. Elena Martinez. We lost a space where people from different backgrounds and generations interacted around shared cultural interests. The teenage clerk recommending an obscure film to a middle-aged customer, the couples negotiating their selections, the families making decisions together. These interactions created social bonds that aren't replicated in the isolated experience of scrolling through Netflix. This perspective suggests that Blockbuster's significance extended beyond its commercial function to encompass a social role that has not been adequately replaced by its digital successors. While streaming services offer greater convenience, wider selection, and freedom from late fees, they do not provide the communal experience that video stores once did. Perhaps this explains why the mythologizing of Blockbuster has intensified as the physical stores have disappeared. In transforming the company into a symbol of 1990s nostalgia, we're not just reminiscing about a retail chain, but mourning a form of social interaction that has largely vanished from our cultural landscape. The irony, of course, is that this nostalgia coexists with our enthusiastic embrace of the very technologies that made Blockbuster obsolete. We may reminisce about browsing video store shelves on Friday nights, but few of us would willingly give up the convenience of accessing thousands of titles instantly from our living rooms. We may lament the loss of serendipitous discovery that came from physically browsing shelves, but we've largely accepted algorithmic recommendations as its replacement. This contradiction reflects the complexity of our relationship with technological change, a complexity that is often lost in simplified narratives about disruption and adaptation. We are not passive victims of technological determinism, nor are we completely free agents making purely rational choices about which technologies to adopt. Instead, we navigate a complex landscape of convenience, community, tradition, and innovation, making trade-offs that we may not fully understand until their consequences become apparent. The story of Blockbuster thus becomes a lens through which we can examine these trade-offs, the gains and losses that accompany technological transformation. It reminds us that innovation is rarely an unalloyed good, that convenience often comes at the cost of community, and that the seemingly inevitable march of technological progress leaves behind cultural artifacts and experiences that may be worth preserving. In the end, perhaps that's why the question, whatever happened to Blockbuster, continues to resonate. It's not just about the failure of a retail chain, but about our collective negotiation with change, our attempts to reconcile the benefits of technological innovation with the cultural and communal values we wish to preserve. The last Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon stands as a monument to this negotiation, a physical reminder of what once was, preserved through a combination of nostalgia, community support, and entrepreneurial adaptation. Its continued existence suggests that while the mass-market business model that Blockbuster represented may be obsolete, the human needs it served, for community, discovery, and shared cultural experience, remain vital. As we look to the future, the question is not whether more retailers will follow Blockbuster's path to obsolescence, undoubtedly will, but whether we can find new ways to meet these fundamental human needs in an increasingly digital landscape. Can we create digital spaces that foster genuine community rather than algorithmic isolation? Can we develop technologies that enhance rather than replace face-to-face interaction? Can we preserve the best aspects of our cultural past while embracing the opportunities of the future? The answers to these questions will determine not just the fate of retail establishments, but the quality of our collective cultural life. And perhaps that's the most important lesson from Blockbuster's rise and fall, that technology shapes culture, but culture also shapes how we use and respond to technology. The choices we make about which innovations to embrace and which traditions to preserve will determine not just how we access entertainment, but how we connect with each other and make meaning in our shared cultural landscape. As for Blockbuster itself, its physical presence may have largely vanished, but its cultural imprint remains, in our memories, in our nostalgia, and in the cautionary tales we tell about adaptation and change. The company that once dominated weekend entertainment has become part of our collective cultural mythology, a symbol of both the rapid pace of technological change and the enduring human desire for shared experience. Whatever happened to Blockbuster, the answer depends on whom you ask. For business analysts, it's a case study in disruption and failure to adapt. For cultural historians, it's a milestone in the transition from physical to digital media consumption. For Gen X and millennial consumers, it's a nostalgic touchstone that evokes a particular moment in American life. And for some, it's a ghost that still haunts the empty storefronts of suburban strip malls, a presence that reminds us of what we've gained and lost in our rush toward digital convenience. Perhaps all these perspectives contain elements of truth. The story of Blockbuster, like all great American business narratives, is ultimately about change and its consequences, about the complex interplay of technology, culture, and human connection that shapes our collective experience. In trying to understand what happened to those blue and yellow stores that once anchored our weekend rituals, we're really asking a more fundamental question: what happened to us and to the ways we once connected with each other through shared cultural experiences? The answer, like the fate of Blockbuster itself, continues to unfold in the choices we make about technology and community, in the institutions we build and maintain, and in the stories we tell about what matters in our cultural life. And in that sense, perhaps the story of Blockbuster isn't over after all. It lives on in our collective memory, in our ongoing negotiation with technological change, and in our continuing search for connection in an increasingly digital world.